Hello everybody and welcome to another detailed diatribe. I am Blue and today I'm joined by Red and we're talking about some Marvel stuff.
Yeah, positively for a change. You're all welcome.
Yes, we'll give some context to that in a minute because today we're talking about the lost art of Marvel's Phase 1.
Oh, that's good. That's clean.
Which is, in some regards, a little bit of a cold take, in some regards, a little bit of a hot take. And we're going to try to split the difference on that and see where we find ourselves because this came out of an idea to sit down and watch a bunch of movies and see if this would actually be fun.
Yes.
Of course, bringing back the Nick Fury quote here, somebody spilled meta-narrative in my movie franchise. The whole point of the Avengers is, can we make a team of heroes that can do the job and be cool and work? And the whole meta-narrative point of the MCU Phase 1 is, can we assemble these movies in such a way that they're like sequels but not, and they come together and then they all have like one big group sequel? Is that a thing? Does that work? We'll find out.
I think that there's a certain amount of context that we've lost sight of in the post-Phase 1 zeitgeist where superhero movies have become so widespread, and not just movies, franchises have become so widespread that it's just like the zeitgeist is that there are 10 million interconnected superhero movies and you need to do homework to understand all of them. When these came out, you had the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies and you had the X-Men movies in terms of superhero movie franchises, and that's not the same thing as laterally branching out, doing a bunch of solo superhero movies and then being like, these are all in the same place and these guys could hang out.
Yeah.
You didn't get that so much. There were a lot of attempts, but the solo standalone superhero movies at the time were notoriously bad. That's how you got your Daredevils and your Catwomans and your Elektras, which I guess was tied into Daredevil, but not really. When this started, the fact that the individual movies were already of decent quality was surprising. And then the fact that they started lacing them together was like, wait, is that allowed?
Yeah.
But yes, not to immediately horn in on your territory.
It's easy to lose sight of how much the Phase 1 of the MCU really did change the game. We're going to get into that. But why are we going to get into that? Because we decided when Red and I were hanging out recently, earlier this year, to sit down and rewatch all 6 of the movies from Phase 1 of the MCU, Incredible Hulk included, for the first time in several years. Last time I saw any of these movies was a long while ago. Well before Endgame for most of them. And in the case of a couple movies, neither of us had seen Incredible Hulk. You had not seen Iron Man 2.
I hadn't seen Iron Man 2.
And we wanted to go in to see if they still hold up, if they were ever good, and if, of course, this being a detailed diatribe, do they have anything to show us now?
Yeah.
So we cleared out a week because also I was still recovering from the flu.
Yes.
Put aside all of our background knowledge and preconceptions and any possible thesis we might have had going in, and just tried to take the movies as they were. Again, we even watched Incredible Hulk for this, so we did put in the legwork here.
That was the
thing. We meant business. We showed up.
A lot of those Phase 1 movies, all I'd heard was that they were disappointing, so I was like, well, I'm not going to watch them then. But this time we were like, no, we're going to do this. We're going to do this right. Yeah. We're going to do it comprehensively. It was very interesting because my question going into this was, were these good or was I just 10? I mean, I was older than 10 at the time, but like, were these good or was it just blasting my forming baby brain at the exact right time to like rewire it? And now that we're very mature adults, the question was, would it still have that sparkle that I remembered?
Exactly. So we are attempting to go in here with a mostly clean slate. Red, to your point, exactly. Us being good citizens of the internet have thrown our pot shots, lobbed our criticism at the Walt Disney Corporation as they deserve.
Oh, yeah.
Firmly but fairly, talking about the idea of superheroes in empty worlds and how the Marvel movies can feel a little bit flat, empty, kind of dull in places. The multiverse problem, starting with Crisis on Infinite Earths and going into the multiverse saga of the current iteration of the MCU. Problems therein. We've touched on this before, we've talked about this, but this is also, I want to make it abundantly clear, we're coming at this from a writing standpoint. We're not trying to throw anything about corporate agenda, or there being one whole gay person in a Marvel movie. Like, not what we're here for today. We're talking about writing, and we're being firm but fair. Emphasis on fair.
Yes.
So, today, we're putting all those previous detailed diatribes aside, open mind, zero nostalgia.
Yeah.
And we are going to go through all of these movies in order. Iron Man, Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, Thor, Captain America, Avengers. What did we think? What did we find as we watched through these movies? Rapid fire impressions go, except I will briefly tangent to say that we are going to be posting the initial thoughts that we recorded after watching each of these movies on our Patreon. So if you are a patron at any tier, you can listen to the extended discussions that Red and I had right after we finished watching these movies.
Yeah.
They start off at like 20 minutes and rapidly balloon towards an hour each.
Straight off the voice memo app, baby.
Yeah. So if you are a patron, you can go check those out. And if you want to become a patron, so you can check those out, links in the description, patreon.com/OSP. It's rare that we plug it, but this time it's relevant.
Yes. It's the director's cut. For this, we've had time to let our thoughts cook and settle. But if you want the fresh impressions, that's where you get them.
And much more thorough, too.
Much more thorough, yes.
Starting off, Iron Man is a perfect movie.
Amazing.
This is simply a fact. Iron Man remains a perfect
but
movie.
Fair. Oh,
To
boy.
be more specific, Tony Stark's characterization is immaculate.
Oh, yeah.
Right off the bat, he's so interesting, he's so fun, he has this kind of edge to him, and then as the movie progresses, we see more of a depth and variety to how he kind of comports himself in different kinds of scenarios. How he talks to the media is very different from how he talks to Pepper, is very different from how he acts as Iron Man and talks to people like Rhodey. It's fascinating to see the many faces of a character like Tony Stark. They're all him, but they present themselves very differently. And the Tony Pepper relationship is actually very charming, which is a surprise where most action movie romances are garbage.
I was quite surprised. I might go into this in more detail later, but I was quite surprised at how much I liked Tony's character in this movie. Because no nostalgia, firm but fair, but I became increasingly frustrated with the way that he was being written as the movies went on. And I was surprised at how good he was when we started off, because this version of Tony is like, he's very much, he's got this public persona. He's got this, like, I'm Tony Stark, billionaire genius, woohoo! But then, like, when we see him in any private moment, he's like this quiet, contemplative gearhead who's just having fun solving problems. And the way he talks to Pepper's the only person he talks to when he's in, like, focusing on work mode. I mean, I'm sure it's no coincidence that it feels very similar to the way that Robert Downey Jr. portrayed Sherlock Holmes in the Guy Ritchie Sherlock Holmes movies, of like, this is like the world's most neurodivergent man who's just like really good at putting on a mask, which is appropriate. And like, I think that this version of Tony, who has Tony Stark, kid genius, cover of Time magazine as like his customer service voice, and then like private, kind of a dork, weirdly like cute dynamic with Pepper, like, oh, she's his employee and he's the boss, but also like he very clearly respects everything she has to say and trusts her completely in a way he doesn't trust anyone else. Also surprising that the obligatory superhero girlfriend romance was like good in this movie, good and nuanced, with Pepper actually having stuff going on.
Very surprising. Again, coming off of the only other stuff we had, which was Spider-Man and Mary Jane in the Sam Raimi movies, as discussed in another detailed diatribe. Not great.
Not so much.
Not great.
And I think that this was a really good introduction, because Iron Man, like you said, perfect movie in that it works perfectly on its own. It absolutely knocked everybody's socks off when it came out, because it was like, wait, superhero movies can be like this? They can feel like, in a weird way, grounded and like less hokey than some of the contemporaries. It's like, he's gonna become a superhero. The entire point of this movie is Tony Stark becomes a superhero, which means he has to be the kind of weirdo who wants to be a superhero and like will do that given the chance.
I do want to have an interesting point of comparison between this and the Spider-Man movies and the X-Men movies, where the X-Men movies were a little bit embarrassed to be about superheroes because, again, like, oh, what did you want? Yellow spandex? Spider-Man, abundantly a spandex-ass kind of movie.
Oh,
like, that's like two ends of the spectrum there. Iron Man setting the tone for the MCU is in an interesting place because it is, in one regard, very real and tactile and has a lot of stuff that, like, makes it feel like it's part of the real world. Like, oh yes, there's Tony Stark on all these real-life magazine covers, and there's all these physical scenarios that he finds himself in, and, like, people he interacts with that feel, like, he talks to reporters. Not a thing that any other superhero really does.
Not so much.
Even though Spider-Man works at a newspaper.
Yeah.
And there's this sense of a physical place in the world and how he fits into it that is very grounded, but yet they're not embarrassed to have him be a giant walking red and gold robot man. There's the simultaneity of both of those things where it is grounded, it is tactile, it is mechanical and real, but it is still colorful and bright and fun, and they're not afraid to be about a comic book character.
Yeah.
And doing both of those things at once is hard.
Because they established Tony as the exact kind of goofball who's like, all right, well, I make this robot suit, it looks kind of boring like this. When we do the color coordination, let's make it bright red and gold. It's like, yeah, Tony
Yeah.
would do that. And the other
Yes,
thing
he
that I think is interesting specifically about that is that, you know, X-Men and Spider-Man, they're superheroes. They get their powers or they're born with their powers, but then they just have their powers. Tony has to build his powers, and I think the movie does something absolutely brilliant just by having him get a lot of stuff wrong on the first go. Like, he prepares for everything he can prepare for, and then he corrects for the things he couldn't prepare for, and he does this constantly throughout the movie. At every single turn, we see him testing and retesting and refining the process. And there's nothing more, like, viscerally inventor-coded than that, because that is truly the experience. Like, nobody gets anything right 100% on the first try. Even Tony Stark, Turbo Chad Mega Genius, has to refine the process. And, like, there's this interesting level of, like, lack of pretense in his characterization as a genius. It's like, he doesn't feel like he has anything to prove. It doesn't feel like whenever he messes something up, that means he's not a genius. It just means he's like, okay, let's correct for that in the next go. Like, he just keeps moving forward, making progress, refining and improving what he's working on. And you've got to get the impression that it's almost compulsive for him. Like, he can't stop himself from tinkering and finding ways to fix things. And that is a great way to characterize a genius inventor all the way down. Like, he cannot stop giving himself these funny little projects and then, you know, finding a use for them that winds up being be superhero. Woo!
Yeah. To bring this to the next little plot point that we have there is the structure of the movie is very elegant, an extremely clean 3-act structure where, you know, part 1 is we are trapped in a cave in Afghanistan. Build the suit. Get out. Very straightforward and solid. We're on Tony the whole fucking time. Step 2 is come back to California, become Iron Man. You have the suit, okay, but you need to build it better. Make it work. We put Tony back in the real world with all of these people that he knows, and he is in this process of like, oh, let's tinker with this, let's figure it out, let's see what we like, let's paint it red. And then that culminates in Golmira, where he's like, okay, no, I have a job to do. I didn't die. It must have been for a reason. I have to make something out of this. And then he goes to Golmira, becomes Iron Man, and then phase 3 is where all the bad guys kind of converge on him and fight. And even then, it's not just he punches better, he is the better inventor. How do you solve the de-icing problem? Tony's characterization pulls him through the movie to his eventual victory because he is that much of a genius inventor.
But the other thing that I think is interesting about Tony is it already feels like they're having to do a little bit of work to be like, why is this guy going to become a superhero? Because this is a superhero origin movie. It has to make sense. And like with Spider-Man, with the X-Men, even like you go earlier with like the Christopher Reeve Superman movies, it's like he has these powers. He chooses to use them for good. Tony does not have any powers from the start. He's choosing to tinker and build this thing out. And at every point it has to be completely intentional. Despite this movie being very clearly funded to be like U.S. military propaganda, it's shocking how like anti-U.S. military it ends up being in the actual message, because Tony's like, I'm gonna build this extremely cool thing and nobody gets to use it but me, because I've seen what happens if I just build weapons and give them to people. Even if I think I'm only giving them to people who deserve them, it all goes wrong, so nobody gets this but me, especially you, U.S. military. And I just think that's so fucking funny. But like, you know, they have to do this work, because otherwise, like, there's a thing that'll come back in one of the other Phase 1 movies that we'll get to. It's the sense that, like, in order for this person to become a superhero, they have to be a little bit insane. They have to not do the sensible thing at one specific turn. And with Tony, the sensible thing would be the thing he starts doing in Iron Man 3, make the suit fly around without him inside it, because he's squishy and he can get hurt, and why would he do that? This Tony has to be the kind of nutcase to put on the experimental flight suit and test drive it at 20,000 feet with no warning, because he wants to see if it works. That guy I could see becoming Iron Man.
Yeah, exactly. And slightly to this point, the abundance of suit-up sequences and Tony being the madman who will throw the suit on himself and be like, yeah, let's just fly.
Let's just
see
give
if it
works.
Shot, let's see if I die. Let's just do it.
Gotta run before you can walk.
Yeah, the tinkering and the suit-up sequences is, as I say here, approximately 75% of the sauce in this movie, and later films, by comparison, are completely sauceless. Nanotech is fucking sauceless. It is just the worst thing. Other people have talked about it. We're not going to get into it, but it is good here because there is so much texture and fun and lavish detailing on all these whirring machines and pieces clicking into place, and his armor like articulates and the vents fly off, and it's so good and so cool, and again, so full of texture that they just don't do it like that later, but we're not going to dally on that. We're going to get to that later on.
I think that Cinema Wins, when he was reviewing this movie, mentioned that like something about the tactileness of the inventing sequences makes him feel like he could be an inventor too. It's like, man, look at how the things all click together. And it's true. Like, you watch that movie and you're like, Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like I could start thinking about the world like this, even though objectively no. But like,
Yeah.
it's the feeling. It's more important that it inspires the feeling that we can understand what Tony's doing, even if what he's objectively doing is sci-fi hot nonsense.
Of course, we move on.
Oh, that concept art is gorgeous.
Yeah, I wanted to use all the concept art for all of these.
Damn, I wish the movie looked like that.
Yeah. The Incredible Hulk, we were not looking forward to going into it.
Yeah.
It's completely fine.
It's completely
It's a
fine.
pleasant, enjoyable-ass movie.
Uh-huh.
People
Yeah.
said this movie sucks, but it's fun. It's cool. It's not the best. It's, impossible to follow up on Iron Man, obviously, but this movie is nowhere near as bad as it had gotten this reputation for being.
Mm-hmm.
It's an interesting setup where we deal with all of the actual Hulk origin story kind of in like the prologue, and then we start with Bruce Banner on the run, and that's a really interesting scenario for him to be in, where he's just trying to keep his head down, be cool, be polite, help people out, not get into any fights in the scenario where he's in because he's gonna win and that's a problem.
Yeah.
And it is a very different setup from the usual hero power fantasy where it's like, no, this guy has to make himself as small and weak as possible or everybody around him is going to die. And then when that does happen, when circumstances, they gamma poison poor Stan Lee, and the military is like, Brazil, go! He becomes a horror movie monster and also simultaneously the saddest, wettest man. It's a good range for the Hulk to have in this movie.
It's funny. Hulk has never been my favorite hero. I always find his stories a little bit one note. This movie made me understand what the appeal of the Hulk as a character is.
Yeah.
Because it's like, even if the Hulk is fundamentally on the side of the angels and a force for good, like Banner, he's not having a good time. No matter what. They do some really interesting things with his characterization, because it's a later point on the slide, but everyone in this movie, except for like Ross and Abomination and the other main villains, are kind. And Banner engages with the world in a kind way, because he could just hole up in a shack in the middle of nowhere and hide out, find a nice place in the Canadian wilderness and just chill, pull a Wolverine, but he doesn't. He's in a population center and he's helping people. And there's a very profound moment early in the movie where he sees one of his like coworkers at the soda bottling plant he works at being harassed by some people, and he's like, I'm gonna walk past it, I can't afford to start a fight, but then he's like, no, I'm not gonna leave her in distress, and he goes back and he doesn't like throw any punches. He just kind of quietly de-escalates, like, hey, do you want to walk home with me? Like, hey, leave her alone, don't give her a hard time. It's sweet. And then, like, his kindness is constantly returned to him in all these small ways. If the Hulk is just in a completely uncaring world, it becomes an uninteresting story, because then he's just a monster being constantly set off. But when the Hulk is in a caring world, he becomes a much more interesting figure as this sort of, like, protective yet terrifying force. And then Banner just literally trying to vibe. This is the movie that made me realize this was the characterization they were using for Earth's Mightiest Heroes, Hulk and Banner, because it's so textbook, like, it's exactly the same guy. And that made a lot of sense, because he wasn't based on any version of Hulk I was familiar with.
Yeah. And, like, I don't want to, oversell this. The movie drags in the second act a little bit, and the third act is brought down by how uncompelling of a villain Abomination is. And it's hard to really buy the full weight of the plot when Ross is so freaking stupid through so much of this movie. He's so much of an idiot, and that does admittedly bring the movie down, but there's thematically, there's a lot of interesting kindness happening here, which makes the movie more compelling and more narratively fascinating to look at and unpack, because the genre of this movie being like a kind of sad on-the-run story mixed with the occasional dip into horror movie monster zone is a weird soup of stuff, but it's pulled together by this core dynamic of like, how good would it be if everyone was just kind? Think about it. Even the insatiable rage monster would be like a lot better, and becomes better because Arwen is really kind to him that one time. That's great. That's cool.
Yeah, this was another like early superhero movie romance where we were like, hey, this rules actually, because like Banner spends the whole movie, except for the very end, being like, the Hulk is a problem that I need to solve. He makes it impossible for me to live in society. My heart rate crests to 200 and he just starts killing people. I have to do something about this. And then Betty Ross is the only person who likes both Banner and the Hulk. She's the only one who's like, Hulk is just scared. Hulk needs a friend. And it's just, oh, so sweet.
Yeah.
It's very funny that that's just how she sounds all the time, though. I thought she was doing a bit for Arwen with just like the sort of whispery elvish maid, but that's just the one speed on that lady. That's the only way she talks, unless she's yelling at New York cabbies, which is, fine, respect.
Or yelling at her idiot dad.
Ross is so, oh my god, he's so fascinatingly bad. Like, it's not that he's like a bad guy, it's that he's bad at being a bad guy. Like, when he sends in the team to hunt down Banner, he like doesn't tell them about the Hulk. He's just like, yeah, it's like a skinny scientist with a laptop. Get him. And then they're like, hey boss, some fucking ogre just like absolutely tore through us. What happened? Where did Banner go? And he's like, that was Banner. It's like, oh, you couldn't have put that in the brief? Come on, dude. What did you think was gonna happen when they started shooting guns? One thing I kind of like about this movie is that he's not hunting down the Hulk because like a Hulk has to be destroyed. He's hunting down the Hulk because he created the Hulk and he's embarrassed that it f***ed up so bad and he doesn't want anyone to know about it. So it's like, oh, okay, he's embarrassedly trying to clean up his mess and only Betty will call him out on it. And that is good. That's fun.
Ross. Classic Ross.
Classic Ross. Man, I wish that concept art was how the movie actually looked, though. Like, I will say that the Abomination's final form does not look great. And you could really, like, you could hear the computers, like, creaking and letting off gusts of steam as it was trying to render that whole thing. But, like, choreography-wise, it wasn't terrible. It just kind of needed more sauce on that, man. Anyway.
We then pivot back to our golden boy, Tony Stark, and we come to Iron Man 2, which is also pretty heavily maligned.
Yeah.
Again, coming off of Iron Man 1, it is really hard to be better. Iron Man 2 is not able to hit the same mark, but I want to give it credit for doing something really interesting with the setup they received in Iron Man 1. It lets Tony Stark be messy. He has this smarmy media persona and this extremely vulnerable, extremely sad inner persona that is grappling with the impending risk of his own mortality because he's getting like palladium poisoning, and he's handling that scenario extremely poorly. So his logic is, if I can be toxic enough, I can convince Rhodey that being Iron Man is his idea, and then he can take over for me when I die in like 3 weeks.
Yes.
Because of palladium poisoning.
Tony is so interesting in this movie in a way that completely gels with who he was in movie 1, because the one thing we got in movie 1 is that like Tony is good at putting on a show and bad at being honest with people in an actual way. Like, his relationship with Pepper is mostly like him being shockingly awkward around her and her just kind of like working with him because she like knows how to translate. But what this tells us is like, okay, Tony is technology smart and people dumb. The thing that made this movie click for me specifically was like, okay, Tony is a genius. Tony can see how to arrange the pieces on the board so that the world will not lose anything of value when he dies. It's like, okay, Pepper gets to be in charge of Stark Industries because she's always been the one who's running the show anyway. She's the only one who knows how to keep this together. Great. Rhodey gets to keep Iron Man going as long as I convince him that, like you said, like that it's his idea. And then the world still has Iron Man, Stark Industries continues to do good work, and Tony can die without anybody being upset about it. Tony is so emotionally unintelligent in this movie. But like, it's such a fascinating mess of issues that like he has all these problems. He would literally rather die than tell anybody in his life that he is dying. And he can't tell them, he can't find the words to tell them. Every time he tries, he makes it worse because he's trying to be like sweet to Pepper, but oopsies, he knew there was a connection between her and strawberries, but he didn't remember the connection was she's allergic to them and they're the one fruit she can't eat. And I was like, damn, that's a whole ass mood. World's most neurodivergent superhero strikes again. But like, the idea that Tony is so unable to be vulnerable that he instead completely self-destructs, but in a very careful way to leave behind every important thing he's created in the hands of the two people on Earth that he trusts. That is so juicy. That's so good. And the catharsis at the end, when they're like all running different tracks to stop the big bad fight, they're all on one little Skype call together, and all the secrets start coming out, and Pepper's like, wait, what do you mean you were dying? What? We have to talk about this. And he's like, yeah, later. Don't worry about it. And it's just like perfect. Incredible. No notes. Like, emotionally, the arc of Tony in this movie is 10 out of 10 no notes. He's perfect.
Yeah. I love that this movie is basically Tony being, I'll keep my emotions bottled up, and next week I'll die.
Yeah, perfect. Excellent plan. And if I'm toxic enough to my loved ones, they won't even be all that sad about it. And it's like, no, Tony, that's not how it works.
Yeah.
And as a way to loosely adapt his alcoholism arc in the comics, I think this way is a much more layered kind of self-destruction. It's not that that he's spiraling into addiction. It's that he's like, no, my death is inevitable. So I have to figure out how to arrange the world correctly so that when I die, the things that I leave behind will still persist.
It's also more narratively cohesive because it's not that the demon in a bottle is the bottle, it's the demon is the suit itself. He's in the bottle, and that's the problem.
Let me out of this bottle.
I think as a way to adapt the demon in a bottle storyline, I think this is a very elegant way to do it, which is probably the only really elegant thing in this movie, because the one core problem with it is that there is a lot going on, and like Tony, the movie gets messy. The way that Iron Man 1 is structured is we start just on him in the cave, and then we kind of open up the funnel and take the perspective of the camera a little bit wider and wider as the movie goes on. This movie starts extremely wide and narrows in by the end as all the threads come together, but it is tricky keeping track of Tony and Pepper and Rhodey and Justin Hammer and Ivan Vanko and whatever the military is doing in the background,
and also Nick Fury and Natasha and Howard Stark haunting the narrative,
and what Coulson's doing. There's a lot going on in this movie, and it is not handled elegantly, and that is the one core problem here that sinks it. But I still think this is way more fun than it isn't.
Yeah, I think if you anchor into Tony's emotional arc and his dynamic with Pepper, and especially Rhodey, who basically ends up as like the secondary protagonist by the end of the movie, it's like, great. All the other stuff is just things happening around this core theme, and I can keep my eyes on the theme and just notice how these essentially environmental effects are shaping the trajectories of everything the characters are doing. It does seem like the part of the story that got the most of the chaff is Ivan Vanko, because it's clear that they were like, Whiplash is going to be the big bad, and then they were like, well, Whiplash is going to be the boss fight. Hammer is kind of good. Oh my god, Hammer is so interesting in this movie. I see why Nando's absolutely silly about this man. As soon as I noticed that, like, Hammer was aping Tony's public persona on the assumption that Tony's public media persona is all there is to Tony, is so funny. Like, he fell for the hype. When they're at the party at the racetrack, Tony is wearing like a blue three-piece suit, and Hammer's wearing like a gold three-piece suit. And in the next scene, Hammer's wearing a blue three-piece suit. I was like, oh my god, he can't help himself. He's a very sauceless villain. Like, he's evil, but in a very corporate way. Like, you look at Hammer and you're like, I could see any real CEO doing this if they had the technology. Like, yeah, that makes sense. And then Whiplash is the supervillain, but also he's far more correct than Hammer. Like, his motivation actually kind of like makes sense and is justified. And that plays into the Howard Stark thing. But Howard also ends up just sort of in this weird position where he's only really looped into the movie by Tony being like, yeah, you know, my dad really didn't like me that much, and then him being like, son, if you're watching this in the future, just know that I did kind of like you a good amount. But I am also the same kind of person that you are, which means I couldn't express it in any meaningful way. And Tony's like, oh yeah, that tracks. Anyway,
it's clever that Tony gets to see it from the other side, which is a bit of good writing. So the Howard Stark angle works insofar as it relates back to Tony, because also that lets him solve the palladium problem and, you know, build a new element, yada, yada, yada. The Vanko angle does not work and ultimately goes nowhere. It's fun to see the way that Tony and Vanko interact, where he has this, like, professional courtesy, talking to him like a fellow inventor.
Yeah.
And it's fun to hear Tony be like that and have this, not public persona, but not his private persona with Pepper, but this kind of, like, inventor to inventor. It's like, let's just talk about this.
This is when he's in gearhead mode, and I think it's really interesting that, like, we really only see him talking to Jarvis like that, because nobody else can keep up with him in this specific regard. And then he finally meets, like, the one other person who could build an arc reactor in a cave with a box of scraps, and he's like, okay, I don't like this guy because he tried to kill me and he cut my car in half, but I couldn't help but take some notes. And it's like, yes, amazing. He can't turn it off. This is who he is.
And we also get to see the way in which Tony has been innovating on his design, having things like the suitcase suit, which is the best scene in the movie.
Yeah, because all he's is like, briefcase, I need the briefcase, please. And it's like, wow, what's in there? Like a gun or something? Like a little blaster? And then he puts it on his chest, and it's like, oh, never mind. It's the first of the weird suits. The things where you can, like, just, you immediately see, like, oh, he tinkered with that thing in, like, 48 hours of no sleep just to see if he could do it. And then he's like, yeah, I mean, if we're going to be on the road, may as well bring it with me.
Tony Stark's game jam, but it's just a different Iron Man suit.
Pepper's like, wait a minute. I haven't heard him eat food in the last 48 hours. Tony! Oh, perfect. Amazing.
It's like he puts a mug of tea in the microwave and puts it in for a minute, and then he never gets it. So like every 20 minutes, the microwave beeps like, "Hey, get your tea, bitch, come on."
Yeah, definitely. I think Iron Man 2 is a movie that benefits from overthinking in that, like, if you just watch it through, you're like, God, so many fucking things are happening. Again, if you click into Tony's specific emotional arc, it's like, oh, this is a really good ride. Like, they get you through a lot of interesting stuff here.
And I do want to also highlight that Thor is happening fully in the background of this movie. It's not just the post-credit scene where we see the hammer in the desert. Well, we'll talk about it more later, but like all the Shieeeeld apparatus is keenly aware of all of this Thor stuff that's happening one state or two states over, which is very funny.
It makes it really funny that Fury's like, I've got the widow babysitting, the billionaire genius wannabe superhero, and meanwhile I'm dealing with an actual fucking god. I cannot be doing both of these things at once. Hey, Stark, you gotta fix this being poisoned right now, because I do not have more than 3 days to devote to this. My attention is desperately needed elsewhere, so fix your already. Quit whining.
Yeah, there's so much fun. It's not just a post-credits, it's the sense of simultaneity that these things are happening at the same time, just off screen. And for the problems this movie has, this is the first movie where you really get to feel the scale of the MCU. You have, Fury shows up in the post-credits scene of Iron Man 1. Tony shows up in the post-credits scene of Hulk, very tacked on. Tony is not written very much in character in that scene. He's like, I always thought hardware was better than software. No, you didn't. No. The whole point is that you're the most important aspect of Iron Man.
Yeah, the only good part of that is when Ross is like, Mr. Stark, you always have such nice suits. And it's like, yes, that is his one salient character detail. Thank you.
But the scale of the world really starts to come into focus with this movie, and I want to give it credit for that. Problems and all. But then we jump into space, into Asgard.
Oh, that concept art.
The Shakespearean
Holy shit.
It slaps. It's so good. The concept art in Phase 1 is incredible. This is the Shakespearean superhero story that we absolutely deserve. Red, I could just turn this one over to you. I mean, see my bullet points here. Go off. Whatever you want to talk about here.
If Thor MCU has one fan, it's me. I've been on this movie's side since day fucking one. Okay, look, Thor works in context. Thor works in the context of we've had Iron Man, Hulk, and Iron Man 2, and those are grounded, salient, tactile. They feel very grounded in the real world. From Tony being like, let's order takeout while I work in my fun little private lab, and Banner being like, I can't use a credit card because then they will just know where I am. Grounded. And then we start Thor, and it is the most high fantasy opening narration of Lord of the Rings bullshit ever. And then we stay there, and we stay there for a while, and then he gets yeeted into the cheapest filming location in the entirety of New Mexico, and we get to see the fish out of water. And here's the thing. Thor is directed by Kenneth Branagh, who has been doing Shakespeare film adaptations for decades, and he usually stunt casts himself as them, so I will give him credit for not making himself the blonde white guy of the Warriors 3, because he could have done that, and he didn't.
Could have done that.
And I see you, Mr. Branagh. I know that must have taken a lot of restraint. But this movie, Thor as a character only works if he is fundamentally from a completely different genre than everybody else. Even in the comics, he'll talk in a different font than everybody else. He's from a completely different kind of story. He has to be. By his very nature, he is something that does not work in the context of normal Earth. So, you get to see him in Asgard. You get to see what kind of person he is. It's not a particularly flattering thing. He's kind of a meathead jock. He likes fighting. He likes kicking ass. And then there's Odin, who's like, great, you're a warrior, cool, but I need you to be able to be a king because I'm not going to be around forever. And Thor's like, yeah, I'll be the greatest king. I'll kick so much ass. And Odin's like, okay, let me start again. Tell me where I lost you. And of course, Loki is in this movie. And you can just tell, Branagh looked at Loki and was like, I know exactly what Shakespeare archetype this whiny little princeling is going to be. He's a royal, but he's not in line to the throne. He's the guy who Kenneth Branagh played in Much Ado About Nothing, the movie. He's the scheming royal. He's perfect. And you kind of see, initially Loki is just causing problems to embarrass Thor on his big day, but his schemes start growing in magnitude as he starts seeing more opportunities, and he's sort of, again, messy. Loki is messy. Thor is very simple, so Loki gets to be where all the complexity is stored in this movie, because Thor is fundamentally, he's just kind of a jerk jock, and he needs to learn to appreciate people who are weaker than him. And that's the thing. Like, again, it's a superhero origin. He needs to go from who he is at the beginning of the movie to a superhero. So Thor needs to learn to respect people who are weaker than him, which is everyone on Earth, except maybe the Hulk, deserves to be protected, and that he can protect them. And so we see him go through this fascinating little arc where initially he's just like, why can't I just brute force my way out of this situation? I don't understand why this keeps happening. And then at some point he just kind of lets go of his pride and is like, actually, it is pretty funny that I keep getting hit by cars. And like chills out, settles down, accepts this new, extremely humble, inexpensive filming location life. And then he has to come back in and return in literally all his glory. And this is the thing that you pointed out, because I don't really pay attention to act structures in movies. So you were the one who was like, does this movie have a Shakespeare 5-act structure like the plays?
Yes.
And we were like, yes, it freaking does. Oh my god.
And it's a mirrored 5-act structure too. We start in Asgard, we come down to Earth. He's lost the hammer, he's questing for it. He's like, oh, I'll just get it, it'll be fine. Perfect midpoint of the movie. He fails to retrieve it, has his sulking arc in Act 3. And then Act 4, he is worthy, he receives Mjolnir. He's still on Earth, though. He's dealing with the Decimator, the Destroyer, whatever the hell it's called.
Yeah.
And then Act 5, he goes back to Asgard to defeat Loki. So he ends where he begins, literally in physical space, except not a dick this time. So he has his full circle character arc that takes him all the way down to Earth and then into the pit of that hole that his hammer fell into, which should be his triumph, but it's not. It's his greatest defeat. And then he has to work his way back up until then he's finally worthy again and he can go back up into space to go finish his business. It's very clean, very, I don't want to say it's perfectly Shakespearean, but it is the closest thing to perfect Shakespearean that a Marvel movie could conceivably be. And it's so interesting that it's done this way, because even if you don't know it literally and overtly, you feel it implicitly in the very poetic nature of how they're structuring, you know, poetry, it rhymes and junk like that. So even if it is felt and not acknowledged, it's really cool to be feeling that.
Yeah, and one thing I really like about Thor's characterization in the movie is that it never feels like he undergoes any like radical inversion of his characterization. When he first arrives on Earth and he's like sort of getting to know Jane Foster and co, he has this attitude after he gets over the initial like, unhand me, you cretins, I am Thor. Like, after he sort of is like, oh, I'm being extracted by these people who are lying on my behalf. How interesting. Like, he kind of always seems like there's a joke that only he knows. And, of course, the joke is that he is Thor, Prince of Asgard. And when Jane's like, oh, yeah, so you're going to get your hammer and then just walk out? He's like, of course not. I'm going to fly out. And she's like, oh, I hope you're not crazy. And he's like, haha, don't worry about it. And then, like, after the hammer refuses him, after it's like, you're not worthy. Odin said you had to be worthy to get me back, and you're not worthy. And he has his darkest hour, and then Loki comes back and lies to him and tells him like, father's dead and mother has banished you for good, so like do it for her. And Thor's like, okay. He stops acting like there's a joke that he's not getting and he starts explaining shit. And that scene where he's just telling Jane like, your theories are correct, here's my side of this, here's the information I have to give you. Like, it's just this moment of like not seeing himself as superior, but seeing him as like, oh, I have something that I can give this person that she doesn't have. And like that is where the core of Thor, superhero, Avenger comes in, of like, I'm not better than this person. I just have something she doesn't that I can share. In later movies, it becomes he has this power that he can use to protect people, to help them in this place where most people are unimaginably squishy and powerless by the standards of Asgard. And so that is the moment where Thor starts becoming the superhero. And when he goes to fight the Destroyer armor by himself and is like, not to worry, my friends, I have a plan. And he's like, the plan is I'm going to die, and then Loki will be satisfied and leave all these innocent people alone. Is like, damn, first part of the movie, Thor would have never done that.
No.
We get to see Thor at full power before this. So it's not like he comes back and he's even stronger. It's like, no, he doesn't need to be even stronger. He basically soloed the entirety of Jotunheim. Like, we know he can do this. We don't need to see him get stronger. We need to see him be less of a dick about it. And so in the end, when we get to see that, it's great. Frankly, in a genre this susceptible to power creep, I think the fact that they are just establishing, like, he doesn't need to get stronger, he doesn't need to learn some new secret technique, he has all the tools he needs at the beginning of the movie, and then he gets Metroided, and they all get taken away, and he needs to get them back. And it works. It works so goddamn well. Also, half of this movie is filmed at a Dutch angle, and it was really funny.
Yes, you were screaming it. Dutch angle, Dutch angle, Dutch
I
angle.
developed a really bad habit when we were watching this movie, because now anytime I see a Dutch angle, my brain's just like, Dutch angle, Dutch angle, Dutch angle. No!
It's a compulsion.
It's a compulsion. I can't help it.
Yeah.
But yeah, this movie's so goddamn good, and it looks so pretty. Like,
Gorgeous.
Compared to how they had to, like, run those fucking servers to the limit, making the Hulk final battle, and then they were like, all of Asgard is CGI. Every single part of it. They live in a pipe organ. F you. It's like, hell yeah, man.
Hey, that's Hallgrimskirke in Reykjavik.
Yeah, but gold this time.
But gold this time. It's a very cohesive aesthetic for a Norse mythology, but like magic and comic-y sci-fi. Still in line with the original, comic designs, but done in a way that fits this aesthetic of the MCU. And it's really impressive that this movie looks like it fits alongside the Iron Man movies and Hulk. That's insane. The mechanization of how the Bifrost works, where there's this bridge and this observatory and this little like needle that shoots into space and just like yeets you, like zoots you out of there as like, boom! Like that's so cool and clever as opposed to just like snap, blip, okay, you teleport to Earth now. There's a process and a weight to how all of these things move, and it's just good. It's just goddamn good.
It's just goddamn good. Also, Hawkeye's in this movie very briefly.
Also, we'll talk about that later. He's in this movie very briefly.
Amazing.
We move on. Yeah! Captain America. I was struggling of what I wanted to put in this little like headline title. This movie is actually heartbreaking.
Yep.
Like extremely tragic in so many ways.
I know.
The thing that makes Steve such a hero is that he categorically will never, ever, ever, ever give up. No matter what, no matter who, the circumstance, whatever has happened to this point. In his initial like chase sequence where he has to go kill Trevor Belmont, not really, but chase him out of the lab in New York. There's 7 different stages of the chase at which the language of cinema dictates he got away, chase is over. And Steve says, no, I'm gonna run fast and catch this man.
Yeah.
I'm going to get him. Oh, he ran outside? No, I got him. He got in a cab? No, don't worry, I got him. Oh, he's shooting at me? No, a hostage? No, don't worry, I got it. He got in a submarine? No, don't worry, I got it. All of these things happen and Steve is like, I'm gonna get him. I'm gonna get this man, goddammit. Nothing will stop me.
I was positive that the submarine was the signal for like, okay, that's it. He got away. And then Steve was like, F you. I can swim now.
Any reasonable person would stop so much sooner than Steve ever would. And even in the case of, all these military people who were trying to make the super soldier happen, you get this scene where he is, in the little test tube pod getting ready to be buff. And even Howard Stark is like, all right, gang, we're done. Let's call it. And Steve's like, no, don't you pull that lever. Keep me in it, Chief. Make it happen.
I'm only half buff now. You can't stop yet.
Yeah.
This is the thing that I was talking about back in Iron Man of like, in order for this person to go from just like being heroic to being a superhero, they have to be kind of insane. Tony has to do the kind of insane thing. Steve has to do the insane thing.
Yes.
If Steve had never gotten the serum and stayed home and collected scrap metal in his little red wagon, like he derisively said to Bucky, he would have still been meaningfully contributing to the war effort. He would have been doing good. The thing with Steve is that his characterization is a little bit of like a weird magic eye puzzle, because if you look at him from one angle, it's like, oh, he thinks he's the one special person for whom the rules don't apply, where he's the one who has to like go off and do it, like he thinks he'll make the difference. And then on the other hand, it's like, no, Steve's whole problem is that he doesn't think he's special in any way, which means he doesn't think that his multitudinous medical issues should exempt him from military service, even though they do mean he is just going to die. In a world where the serum doesn't exist, Bucky is right and Steve is categorically wrong. But luckily for Steve, he lives in a world that rewards that kind of heroism to the point of actual insanity, and will be like, yes, you can have the tools you need to make a difference. And even then, there's a really interesting pacing mirror between Captain America and Iron Man, which is the point where they get the superpower is not the point where they become the superhero. Tony has the suit working before he decides to go to Golmira and start single-handedly solving the my weapons are everywhere and being used for evil problem that is his heroic motivation. Steve gets the serum before he goes off and becomes Captain America. He's just using it to get war bonds, which is, again, tangible contribution to the war effort, but it's not good enough for Steve. He's like, no, I could be doing more. It's not enough. I have to do more. And this is such an interesting core of his characterization, because it is the reason why he is a hero, and it is also his biggest flaw, because he can never be satisfied with a job well done, because there will always be more that he can do. He will not give up. And that is his greatest strength, and also it causes almost every problem in his life, and that is so good.
It's, talking about Shakespeare types of stories, this is a kind of Shakespearean tragedy where the kind of person Steve Rogers is causes most of the problems that he deals with. And that's good drama.
And at the same time, part of the reason he is such a motivating figure is because he is the unreachable star. He is in many ways the Superman analog in the Marvel Universe of he's the best and he's the first. He is the one who sets the bar that nobody else can clear. Unlike Superman, there are people who are stronger than him. There are people who can do more of him, but there is nobody who more tangibly embodies what it means to be a hero than this character. And that's why they usually put him in charge of like, okay, I trust this guy to give us our direction because he is the one who is the best of all of us. And in stories that write him well, that's a very solid part of his characterization. Earth's Mightiest Heroes does Captain America really well. They use this characterization for him.
It's a really good characterization for Steve Rogers that could have easily been a lot flatter, but it wasn't.
Oh, yeah.
I'd also want to highlight the compelling Marvelification of World War II into this retro futuristic sci-fi tech kind of thing they've got going on. It's like, what if all the crazy ideas that people did have in World War II were real? Because all kinds of crazy people were drawing up in the 40s. It's like, what if we could actually do all those things?
Yeah.
And this is, of course, protect Howard Stark at all costs. He's haunting the narrative like a champ.
Howard in this movie, you look at him and you're like, of course this is Tony's dad. He's just Tony, but again, it's so good. The specific thing with the technology, we noticed something about that. One of the Hydra weapons made a noise, and you were like, hey, that's the repulsor. Oh, never mind. Okay, well,
hold on. Wait.
Oh, God. I jumped ahead so fucking far.
Hydra guns and arc reactor repulsor make the same blast. We'll talk about that more in a second.
In like 30 slides. Holy shit.
Don't worry about it.
It's interesting because the introduction of the Tesseract and therefore like Hydra as the super science division makes it make sense that like you could sort of heighten the stakes from, regular World War II to advanced World War II.
Yeah.
It's like you introduce a superhero to deal with a super threat. And Captain America is in this interesting position where in the real historical context, he was introduced just to deal with regular World War II. It's like, what if we had a guy who was real good at punching and he could just punch his way straight to Hitler and then punch him? Real good. Hell yeah.
Yeah.
Which was fucking bold because the US wasn't involved in the war at that point. Hell yeah. But in this movie, it's like, no, you really believe that somebody like Steve is necessary right now. The narrative is rewarding that sort of like insane dedication to like, I've got no more right to safety than any of the other brave boys out on the front lines, where it's like, Steve, you have a little, they're not going to force you. You can stay home. It would be okay. He's like, yeah, that's nice. Anyway.
And that's the same logic that leads to, at the very end, it's like, no, this is my choice. I'm going to take this plane down. I'm doing it. Sorry, Peggy. It culminates in the ultimate tragedy of the movie is this genuinely heartbreaking scene where they're talking about like, okay, 8 o'clock, don't you dare be late. And Steve's like, no, you know what, I won't. It's like,
It's heartbreaking for so many reasons, but the best part is Steve has at every point managed to do the impossible. Every time someone has said, no, that's it, it's over, he's proved them wrong. So you know that on some level, Peggy is sort of humoring him and herself of like, yeah, we're gonna have that date, but you know she still showed up just in case. And that makes it so sad.
Tortuous. The ending of this movie is tortuous.
It's so good. I have to give special credit to the very final scene of the movie where Steve wakes up.
Yeah.
And there's that brief moment where it's like, did it work? How long has it been? Has it only been like a few weeks, maybe a month? But I've seen people who are much better at this than I am point out that like everything about that setting where he wakes up, the nurse, the bed, the game playing on the radio, there's no fucking way Nick Fury didn't know that Steve was at that game, or at least that game happened months before he went under the ice. There's no fucking way that the world's most paranoid man wouldn't have double-checked that. So, the way I've seen this framed, there's like a really good Tumblr post somewhere about this where someone did all the analysis, and it's like, no, this is a test. This is a test from Nick Fury to see, is the legendary hero that Sergeant Jack Fury told me about, has his brain been muddled by the ice? Was he ever really that cool? How long does it take him to realize that something is wrong? And the answer is about 20 seconds. Tops. And then he's immediately single-handedly fighting his way out. And it's like, okay, pump the brakes, we got him. He's, okay, the legend is real. Chill out, man. So good.
This movie is so well put together.
Yeah.
I also want to give credit to the portrayal of Red Skull, a real Nazi-ass Nazi. Like, they really let him ham it up. His whole thing is like, yes, you see the Fuhrer is actually a big stupid idiot, which is true. And you see the Nazis are actually really bad at their jobs, which is true. But what I love about Red Skull is he's like, those Nazis, they aren't Nazi enough. I'm gonna Nazi so hard.
One of the things that I really like about how much of a Nazi the Red Skull is that they're really playing up the specific weird dorkiness of like how obsessed the Nazis were with Norse mythology.
Yeah.
Wagner and did irreparable damage to the Norse mythology research ecology, and like it's entirely because these dipshits were just so hung up on it. But like getting this after watching Thor, where it's like they're like, we walk in the footsteps of the gods, and it's like, I know Thor, he's a close personal friend, and he thinks you're a big stupid idiot and also a jerk.
Yeah.
There's something really compelling about that.
Yeah.
And the specific point that you have on the slide about like Steve is precision designed to piss this guy off, because like Red Skull really buys the hype of like, we are the superior people, and like then he gets the serum and his face falls off and he's like, I did that on purpose. It was the accent is fluctuating wildly.
That was an RNG manipulation strat.
I actually it's more efficient. I am now more aerodynamic. Why is it becoming French? I'm not trying to make him French. But I guess that's what peak performance looks like. But the fact that he's like, well, that's what makes me special. What about you, Mr. Rogers? What makes you special? And Steve's like, absolutely jack shit, my guy. I'm just a kid from Brooklyn. Steve should have cursed more. I'm just saying, if he's from Brooklyn, come on, let him have it.
Oh, yeah.
Let him cut loose a little bit. He's precision designed to piss him off, because Red Skull's like, there has to be something. There has to be something that made you special. Why Erskine chose you and you know, thought that I was a failure. And Steve's like, well, no. Sorry, I am Joe Everyman. I just happened to get really buff. Yeah, I don't know. It's fun. It's very fun.
It's good. I love this movie.
This movie it's got some pacing wonkiness that shows up sometimes. There have been times when I watched it where I'm like, I don't really get it.
Second act, yeah.
They basically win World War II in a montage, which is fine, but like, it's, whatever. But like overall, theme-wise, the way it ties up this part of the MCU and then gets us ready for Avengers, it's flawless. It does a really good job.
Flawless. Yeah. So Iron Man 1 is a perfect movie. Thor is your favorite.
Yes.
Captain America is my favorite in this sequence. But of course, we come to Avengers. So far, it's been bangers only. Even Hulk is pretty good. But after Captain America, IRL, and you can hear this if you listen to the post-movie recordings, we were starting to get worried, because all of these films so far had focused so heavily on characterization. Our fear was that when you throw all these guys into a blender, it would get flattened in a bid to fit them all into the same movie. We talked a little bit about this kind of like tone problem of when you have people crossing over, whose tone do they kind of converge on? Is there a midpoint? Does someone get, character assassinated in order to fit in this world? And as we put them into interactions together, our attempts to put off the rose-tinted glasses of, Avengers 1 is the best Avengers movie, is it going to be like, Avengers 1 is bad actually? Were we going to go into this thinking the Whedonification had taken hold and this movie was actually going to be a disappointment compared to what had come before?
Yeah, we were genuinely very worried about this, in large part because one of the things that, even before it turned out that Whedon was kind of a huge jerk, people were pointing out, like, he really only writes, like, 4 major character archetypes. Like, he kind of, when he's in charge of writing established characters, he'll turn them into one of the archetypes he's familiar with, even if it doesn't fit. So we were very worried that we were going to look at these characters whose nuanced arcs we had just gotten really attached to and see them flattened into these pre-existing quippy character arcs where they all talk the same, and we were very concerned about that.
Good news, it still rules.
Yeah. We had some good reason to be concerned, but it levels out. All the problems stop being an issue pretty quick.
Yeah, so we'll take each half of this, the good and the bad. First off, the Avengers is an absolute blast. Loki is a spectacular villain in this film. He's still just as sniveling and weaselly as ever, but he's so much more threatening now that he has this power granted to him by, off-screen Thanos.
It's not just that. Loki never got to menace humans except through the Destroyer armor in Thor 1. We were only seeing him as the weakest of the incredibly strong guys. So we were like, oh yeah, that's Loki, team nerd, the god of lies. He likes lying to people because he's not good at anything else. And like, he needs the Destroyer armor to wreak havoc. So we're always kind of like, well, but what can he do against like regular people? And the answer is whatever the fuck he wants. He's still an Asgardian and a Jotun. Like he's really fucking strong, and he's so intimidating as soon as he's given people who are not all, like, tougher than him.
The first sequence where he shows up in the Shieeeeeld base and just wrecks it immediately, the threat has been established. This is an Avengers-level threat.
That's the thing.
The first one ever.
And again, it only works if Thor is from a completely different genre than anyone else. Anything coming out of his story and intruding into reality is, like, a terrifying eldritch threat that nobody knows how to deal with. And when Thor and Loki are in scenes together, the genre changes around around them. They start monologuing
Yep.
at each other Shakespeare style. Like,
so good.
with everyone else, Loki is like smarmy and like, haha, I'm in charge. I'm the strongest and the coolest. And then Thor shows up and Loki's like, father always liked you best. Why? Why? Like, tears. And it's like, good, amazing. This is exactly the kind of like sniveling little weasel that I could absolutely see Tumblr losing their minds over for 10 years running.
And he still has all of this doublespeak in his words where he's talking about like, oh, you're always made to kneel, and he's kind of talking about himself a little bit.
You were made to be ruled. Yeah, because he's under Thanos' thumb. Like, he's not being brainwashed. He's just being controlled through like pain and fear and the idea that without this power, he's nothing. So when he's doing his monologue, like, you were made to be ruled, in the end, you will always kneel, is like, yeah, that's why he's the villain of this movie, because when faced with this, he did the cowardly thing, and rather than standing up to this greatest threat, he was like, yes, this will give me personal empowerment and, satisfaction over my idiot brother. Hell yeah, sign me the fuck up, sailor. And it's like, great, okay, Loki, that's why you're the bad guy, and why everyone who will stand up to you is the good guy.
Loki in this movie, A+++, incredible. And with Loki established, we have to then create our team. And as we go through getting everybody back on board, whether you've seen the movies or you haven't, everybody has a strong introduction, and almost everybody has a good introduction, and those two are different.
Yeah.
We'll talk about that in a second.
Yeah.
But again, with Loki, his plan for the helicarrier works flawlessly. It becomes a disaster. The fallout is grade A cinema, and as soon as the explosions start happening in the helicarrier engines, we are in peak cinema from there on out for the rest of the movie. We love the Hulk Chaos Hour.
Oh, yeah.
It's such a good just unraveling of everything on this extremely fragile boat in the sky they happen to be in.
And it's great because Banner knew the whole time. He was like, this is much worse. This is a terrible idea. It's a
No, this is
disaster
much
waiting to
worse.
happen. This is so
Yeah.
bad. I think that, like, emotionally, the best, most tense scene in the movie is when he's starting to Hulk out while Widow is trapped by the rubble.
Yeah.
The soldiers run in and like, Widow, and she like waves them off. She's like, let
Wave
me
them away.
fucking handle this. Like,
Yeah.
I might not be able to handle this, but you guys definitely cannot handle this. Which is, again, Widow's characterization, she feels like the one member of the team who's like, I'm not a hero. And it's like, oh, really? Really, Natasha? You think that wasn't a heroic thing you just did? Okay.
Yeah.
The relationship between Banner and the Hulk is like a really powerful thing that I think, not to start dunking, but I think a lot of later movies kind of just squander because they're like, we don't really want to focus on this. It's such a weighty emotional thing to handle that it sort of distorts the story around it, so they just kind of sideline it or be like, he fixed it off screen, don't worry about it.
Crime.
But this, where he's trying so hard not to be terrified and hurt enough to Hulk out without his consent, because he knows if he does, he's probably going to kill this woman. Amazing.
Yeah.
Perfect drama. Hell yeah.
And a great kind of like, beat one, beat two scenario for Natasha, where in her introduction with Banner, you see like the tear in her eye. She's terrified, like, this is a scenario above my pay grade. I cannot deal with this. And then she is forced alone to deal with it.
Yeah.
Cinema.
Yeah.
Perfect. Writing.
And the fact that she's introduced in her element,
Yeah.
in a scene where we're not sure how under control she has the situation, and it turns out she has it completely under control and she's playing it up. Perfect.
100%.
Amazing. She's a spy. She's an infiltrator. This is her job. She's good at that. And then they're like, we need you to deal with the guy who can turn into an unkillable, super fast, incredibly strong rage monster if you look at him funny. And we need you to convince him to be our friend. And she's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
She'll do it. She's a professional. It's her job,
Yep.
but she's not going to be happy about it. Her entire skill set is about making you guess how in control she is. She can either play like she's completely in control to bait you out, to be like, okay, I actually didn't have the cards, but I bluffed, or she can play like she has no control when actually she's completely on top of things, because again, it keeps her enemies off balance. That lets her use her skills. And with the Hulk, it's like, yeah, she can bluff, but he can call her bluff immediately. And then she's like, okay, gun time. I will give Whedon credit. He cooked with the idea that those two had a really interesting potential dynamic in terms of the person who will always make you wonder how much control they have versus the person where you can immediately tell how much control he has based on whether or not he is a giant green rage monster.
The individual dynamics can work really, really well when they are allowed to shine and when they have the space for those kinds of things to happen. And again, the manipulator and the manipulator, Loki and Black Widow, one of the best scenes in the movie, where it's like, which one of them is better at lying?
Yeah, how much control does she have? How much is he getting under her skin, and how much is she just letting him think he is? It's good. It's solid characterization.
Everybody gets to be competent in their own ways, even Loki, even the villain. We've seen that earlier, but everybody has their grade of problem that they can solve. and sometimes putting them in a position where they can't solve the problem makes for good cinema. But everybody has their competence and their skill, and seeing that come together in the team for something like the Battle of New York is an utterly perfect third act. It's an hour of just ass kicking, and they've absolutely earned it by that point. It is so unbelievably good, even to this day. Like, the CGI still holds up just fine. It looks great. The art direction is really cool. The way that the action is composed, and how even things that I forgot I didn't think about, like, how do they keep it contained to just this area of Midtown? It's like Thor is doing circles around the Empire State Building trying to keep them all in this box. It works so well, and it flows, and it's just fun, and everybody gets to kick ass. As a victory lap for this movie and for Phase 1, the Battle of New York is perfect.
Yeah.
Perfect.
We were having our concerns, which I'm sure we'll get to in a minute, but
Next slide.
as soon as the Battle of New York started, we were like, okay, the movie is from this point forward perfect, 10 out of 10, no notes. To just letting these guys kick ass, get in all their combo moves, acknowledge the fact that power scaling wise, Thor can handle 90% of the army himself, and everyone else is just fighting what gets through. Perfect. Look, I like it when you have a team with some cohesion. I like it when the power levels matter. I like it a lot more when they acknowledge everyone has unique strengths, and some of these guys are just... Some of them are on another level, okay? And we can just delegate. Again, Earth's Mightiest Heroes, my beloved. There's a part where the entire island of Manhattan gets raised into the air, and then it starts to fall, and Thor is on catching the island duty while everyone else tries to deal with the guy who picked up the island. And it's like, yes, this is why you have an incredibly strong flying brick on your team, so they can catch the island of Manhattan sometimes.
This is, however, also the movie where some of the problems start to show up. It's important that we get both sides of this. Tony Stark is borderline unrecognizable in this movie, the way they portray him, because he is only the Stark Expo smarmy presenter. Tony Stark in this movie is what Justin Hammer thinks Tony Stark is.
Exactly. Very much so.
And that is Whedon's biggest failure right here.
And on a related note, Tony's characterization suffers because Pepper's characterization suffers because she gets hit with the Whedon beam real hard. Like in her first intro, she's walking around in booty shorts with no shoes, and it's like, yeah, I wonder whose idea that was. All she's doing is kissing up to Tony because, like, oh, we're dating now. We can be, like, cute and charming, and oh, I have a fun idea for a way I can reward you later. Tee-hee-hee. It's like, where the hell is the extremely efficient secretary/CEO from the previous two movies, and what have you done with her? Tony talks to Pepper in a way he doesn't talk to anybody else. He is, in a very real way, the most honest he is with her, because when he's dealing with Jarvis, when he's in gearhead mode, when he's just inventing, he's kind of just in his own head, and it's very different in there. But when he's talking to people, unless they're Pepper, and in some cases Rhodey, there will always be a level of pretense and fakery around it. They'll usually be talking to Stark Expo Tony, but with Pepper it's different, and you don't get that in this movie because Pepper isn't characterized in any meaningful way. She's just there to be the girlfriend hanging on, which is frustrating but unsurprising. And it does mean that Tony's characterization suffers from a writer who's bought the hype when the first two movies worked so well because we were intimately aware of Tony Stark not buying his own hype and frequently not even bothering to maintain the facade of his own hype in public when he was, a little bit too out of it. Or like there's a really telling little moment in Iron Man 2 where like he's dealing with Hammer at the big party. Pepper's like, I'll go deal with this, and he just says to her, please don't leave me. Full volume, middle of a party. He's like, don't leave me alone with this idiot. Damn. Holy, Tony does not care. That's important. But Tony in this movie has to be the coolest, biggest dickus on the screen at any given time, and it is frustrating because he loses all of the charm that he had from being ultimately just kind of this dork, this inventor who's not very good at dealing with people but is pretty good at manipulating them, and therefore can kind of split the difference into something that approximates human interaction because he's otherwise not good at it at all. Also, it's not so much on this slide. I don't know if it's on a later slide, but Tony, I think, also sort of warps the characterization of Steve in the first half of the movie because, there it is. Okay. Yay! But yeah, like, Tony having to be the coolest, baddest guy on screen means that Steve has to get Vegeta'd a lot, in that he has to be the sort of obnoxious guy who throws the first punch. If you pay attention to the rhythm of all the fights before the big Battle of New York, Steve shows up, has the first arc of the fight, gets absolutely pummeled into the ground, keeps getting up, to his credit. They don't make him lose that part of his characterization. And then Tony shows up and bails him out.
Yep.
It's every time. It's when he's confronting Loki. It's when he's fighting the one guy with the machine gun on the helicarrier who's just inexplicably keeping Steve pinned down because he didn't bring his shield with him, I guess.
Yeah.
It's every time. And every time they have a conversation, Steve says the dumb jock thing, and Tony says the cool, smart, sexy thing. And it's just the only rhythm of their conversations. I think that there's a core of characterization here that is being used to justify this, which is Tony Stark's multitudinous daddy issues. Oh, Howard Stark would not shut up about Steve. He even says that at one point, like, my dad wouldn't, this is the guy my dad wouldn't shut up about? I can't believe it. Yeah, it's almost like he's not being portrayed by a writer who likes him. I don't know, man. The jockification of Steve Rogers is a very strange angle for this movie, and it feels like a thoughtless writing decision just being done by, like, yeah, he's the strong leader guy, but Tony's the real qualified person to be in charge. I don't know. I feel like Tony would much prefer to not be in charge if he could get away with it.
Yeah, desperately so.
Yeah.
It is an interesting problem that admittedly highlights the strength of the previous films up to this point, and even highlights where Avengers does do this right. Like, yeah, put on the suit, let's go a few rounds, and then explosions, put on the suit.
Yeah,
and then
that's
it's like,
pretty
okay,
good.
We're good. Yeah, that was a really good scene.
And the fact that their emotions are being manipulated and heightened by Loki can, it can cover a multitude of writing sins, but still, it feels like slapping a Band-Aid on a bullet hole at that point.
I will give credit for the fact that we could tell as we were watching, down to the individual lines, what was in character and what wasn't. That is a testament to how good the writing has been up to this point. And when it works so well.
Yeah.
And I don't think I really noticed that earlier. I didn't think that Avengers had those kinds of problems in it. Like, oh, Avengers 2 is very quippy and weird.
Yeah.
Onward, you get those kinds of problems of the Whedon-y dialogue infecting Marvel. I didn't think that Avengers had it that bad. And I was largely right. It's not, everyone's quipping. It's just people are talking a little bit out of character. And their characters have been established so strongly that we can tell to the line, to the words within the sentence where applicable. And that, I will give credit to, is really cool and highlights what is good about this. So jumping back a slide, none of these faults sink the film, but the trajectory is what's oof. In here, it still holds together. Avengers is still good, but we can see why it starts to fall off later. Again, we'll talk about it more a little bit later.
Yeah, definitely. I think that by the time we got to Ultron, the problem started to be that everyone was talking the same. Which was a problem because, again, the joy of a team like the Avengers is that everyone is so different. The way they see the world is different. The way they talk is different. And so if everyone starts throwing the same kinds of quips out, if you could take a line out of context and be like, I don't know who said that. One of the examples in Avengers 1, the one that we both snagged on early on where you were like, uh-oh, is when they have Loki locked up in the Quinjet and the thunder rumbles and Loki kind of looks up a little warily and Steve turns and says, what's the matter? Scared of a little lightning? It's a lob. It's to set up, I'm not overly fond of what follows, because then it's like, oh, my fucking boy. And of course, I can only be so mad because then my boy shows up and then he and Loki immediately have one of the best characterization scenes because these two are in a different genre than everybody else again. And like, I love that they just start going off on each other in a very interesting way. But that line, we looked at each other, we were like, that...
What?
Steve throwing out fucking high school bully line. Steve, I don't like bullies. I don't care where they're from. Throwing out a jock taunt that would be said before shoving someone in a locker. And we were like, Tony could have said that in Stark Expo mode. Steve should never say that. And that was weird.
Especially to, like, someone who's actively a prisoner. Like, come on, like, your whole thing was breaking out POWs last movie, buddy. Come on.
Come on, dude.
Get out of
and,
there.
like, that's one of the fun things about Steve in his first movie is that, like, he was very polite all the time.
Oh, yeah. That's what's so fun about him.
He vaults into a Hydra troop carrier and just kind of goes, fellas, and then punches everybody. It's like, hell yeah, sir. Pugilism. And it's just, Marcus of Queensberry rules. But, like, I think that was probably the line where we were like, that was wrong. That shouldn't have been said. There were a few others where we were like, that was a little weird, but that was the one where we were like, that they should have caught that. If they were keeping an eye on Steve's characterization, if they cared about maintaining it, they would have noticed.
I will say, imperfect, admittedly, no film is, but damn close for this attempt here. All these years later, 13 years later at time of recording, this movie still rules. I feel like in some regards, it has not aged a day. In some regards, it's better than we ever could have known when it came out. With all of that done, analysis time, why did Phase 1 work? And I want to take a lot of the things together that we've been looking at so far. First is characterization. everybody is very strongly characterized in their individual movies, and the heroes experience an arc that is calculated to fit with their specific movie that they are in. Thor cannot solve the problem that Captain America's movie calls for. Iron Man cannot solve the problem that Thor's movie calls for. None of them would work in each other's films in quite the same way. Maybe they could eke by, but where a lot of superheroes can kind of feel like interchangeable, it's like, okay, their power sets are different, but they will kind of act the same ways. All of these heroes respond to problems in pretty different ways. I see a thought in your head, though. I'll let you jump in.
Well, I was like, I feel like Thor probably could have dealt with most of the problems that Steve was facing, but the problem is it wouldn't have made Thor into a good person, which was necessary to make Thor work. Like, could he have done enough damage? Yes. Would he have been doing the right thing? No.
Yeah. There's a very strong sense of setting that pervades all of these movies, whether we're in the workshop with Tony, tinkering around with stuff, whether we're on the run with Bruce Banner, whether we are out in space in Asgard, or in a tiny little town in New Mexico with Thor, or whether we are in this very sci-fi World War II setting. The texture in the world is so strong, and we've been calling that out in the past several slides. But also, each film has its own unique tone, style, and structure, whether we're talking about the types of acts, Shakespearean 5-act structure, what happens in the 3-act structures that most of the other movies follow pretty clearly, the kinds of character movements that are happening are pretty unique to each film, so it doesn't feel like we're watching the same movie 6 times in a row. And then we get the benefit of playing with genre a little bit, whether it's, Shakespeare play, World War II sci-fi, kind of inventory action movie, or a very tense on the run, a bit of a drama, a bit of a horror movie, spatchcock horror movie in the case of the Hulk. And then finally, all 6 of these movies feel deeply, meaningfully interconnected, not just with the characters crossing over, but a lot of other things.
Yeah.
So we can talk about this as a kind of woven narrative, and the top line is, oh yeah, I saw that guy in that film. Nick Fury and Phil Coulson in Iron Man 2, Natasha Romanoff in Iron Man 2, Clint is in Thor, #1 villain Loki is also in Thor. But we also get things like, okay, yeah, the Tesseract, the big MacGuffin, that came from Cap's movie. Okay, sure. The very, oh, I saw this thing in this other place. The most, basic kind of connection we can have of, oh, I recognize this thing from that thing. Great, easy. But there are, beyond that, a lot of details, big and small, that cross over between multiple movies, not just leading into Avengers, but leading into each other, and that is where I think this phase really shines.
Yes, I remember we were doing a lot of DiCaprio pointing, especially as the movie started going along, because after Iron Man 2 is when they start pulling the threads together, because Incredible Hulk is only very loosely connected, but it is still connected. I'm sure we'll get there. Yeah. There's a connection that it took us a little while to find, but it's just there, literally. Like they say it textually. It's not headcanon, it's just canon.
Yeah.
Even before that, even when it was just Iron Man 1, there was just this tiny little detail that, oh, right, Tony lives in a world where superheroes are at least a concept. Because at the end, before his big I Am Iron Man reveal, he's trying to deflect the idea that he could be a superhero. How ridiculous. Ha ha ha.
Yeah.
And it's the concept of superheroes exists, but there aren't that many of them. How interesting. Okay, yeah, go on with that. And that is the established canon that we go with going forward. We know about superheroes. Captain America existed. So they're a concept, but they're mostly a fictional one.
Yeah.
Until...
Let's go through a couple of different items line by line here. The Tesseract, most notably, it really gets around.
Yeah.
It is an Asgardian artifact, a table scrap from Odin's treasure vault, but it falls into Earth and becomes a war-defining power through the events of Cap 1. Of course, you mentioned Red Skull says we walk in the footsteps of gods. That is true, but not for the reasons that he thinks. And then it ends up, after the events of Cap 1, in Howard Stark's hands, where he begins to tinker with what turns into the arc reactor technology.
Yeah.
And then that leads into what Tony has later on in building the arc reactor in a cave and not dying, so he can thank Thor for that.
Well, that's an interesting connection, because I don't think they ever explicitly state that Howard Stark derived the arc reactor from the Tesseract, but the timeline lines up, because Obadiah Stane is that was the thing we made in the 70s to shut up the hippies, and it's 30 years of tinkering with the Tesseract, I could see that making sense. Because otherwise the idea is that Howard Stark just invented this incredible clean energy technology from straight up nothing. And he's a genius, that could be a thing. But you noticed, in Captain America, the Hydra weapons, the blue energy things that are powered by the Tesseract make the repulsor blast noise. And we were like, oh, that's funny. They reused the sound effect. And then we were like, wait a fucking second. No, hold on. They're powered by the Tesseract. The repulsors are powered by the arc reactor, which is blue, and a mysterious energy source that Howard Stark made after he got the Tesseract. Wait a fucking second. Like, we were going full like Pepe Silver. Like, that has to have been intentional. That has to have been why that happened.
Yeah, and Cap clocks this connection between Hydra and Loki's tech in Avengers. He doesn't spell it out, but he does acknowledge that link.
Yeah, well, I mean, he knew the Tesseract was the big MacGuffin they were dealing with. He saw it evaporate Red Skull, and then it's like, okay, well, Loki he snatched the same thing, he's using the same thing, interesting. And then it's like, oh, S.H.I.E.L.D. is using this to build weapons tech. And that takes on an interesting twist because it's like, okay, well, Tony will no longer share his technology, but the arms race is still continuing, so S.H.I.E.L.D. is just going to the source, straight to the Tesseract to try and figure out how to replicate the same effect.
Yeah.
It also works as just a little bit of an alternate history ripple effect of like, what if we dropped a clean energy alien power source straight out of Asgard into the 1940s, into the hands of an American super genius? What would that do? And the answer is not a whole lot until his son got his hands on the same concept. But just the idea that the arc reactor design came from Howard studying the Tesseract, I think really ties the whole thing together.
And the Tesseract does have some other interesting ripples where when the Tesseract explodes in Red Skull's megaship, Yggdrasil is visible in the cloud, which is so cool. And we have the context from Thor right before to be able to be like, oh yeah, that's that. Wait a minute, this is super cool. We also see an actual mathematical Tesseract in Jane's notebook, so a cute little, more of an Easter egg there, but still very cool.
Yep.
And then also the Marvel Big Blue Sky Beam that became kind of a running joke and a point of derision is unified in the fact that it is all Tesseract explosions.
Yeah.
The arc reactor in Iron Man 1 is a Tesseract-derived Sky Beam. The zooting Red Skull into hell is the Tesseract, and then the Chitauri invasion portal is powered by the Tesseract, and it manifests in the same kind of Sky Beam.
It's not just powered by the Tesseract, it's a miniature Bifrost. It's got the same needle globe design.
Right.
Like, they pulled every element together, and it's not like they ever bring it up. It's not like Selvig saw the Bifrost, but Loki was feeding him information, and Loki knows what the Bifrost looks like and is, and it just makes so much sense. Nothing gets pulled out of nowhere. They're like, yeah, we have this, we have that, we've combined pleasures, and now we have a brand new problem for everyone to deal with.
Yes, Tesseract is a very elegantly woven piece of kit throughout the movies thus far, touching basically everything except Hulk.
Well, not Hulk, but they were trying to replicate... God damn it.
Okay.
Yes,
Yes.
They were trying to replicate the super soldier serum and the formula that Dr. Erskine had, because he was the only one who knew the secret, and then he died. And they were like, the whole problem, they established it in Captain America. They were like, okay, we only have one super soldier. We wanted an army. We only have one. What good can one super soldier do? And the answer is quite a lot. But they kept trying to replicate it. And so Ross and co. were trying to find ways to, what combination of chemicals and radiation will recreate Captain America. And instead they created the Hulk. And that was such a cataclysmic failure from Ross's perspective that he tried to bury the evidence and snuff it off the face of the planet.
And they do manage to bring the gamma element of this back into the Tesseract because Bruce Banner says, oh yeah, it's radiation is gamma, so I can track it, and that's his logical reason for being included in the team beyond being a giant green rage monster in the events of Avengers. Yeah, gamma male grind set, funny slide. But also, Howard Stark, the #1 narrative haunter since 1943. We talked about how he haunts the narrative in Iron Man 2, but he also, of course, appears in Captain America. And what's fun is that the Stark Expo, which we first see in Iron Man 2, we get the original version of Howard's Stark Expo in 1943 when he's going to his recruitment drive where he goes to try to sign up for the 5th or 6th or 7th time.
And not just that, the final battle in Iron Man 2 takes place in Stark's Epcot equivalent, and then that's where the double date is.
Yeah.
We see the same set, but from a completely different angle because we're not seeing Tony fight a bunch of robots in it this time.
Yeah, very clever not necessarily reuse a set, obviously, but to iterate on an idea and giving it more texture by showing it in different scenarios being blown up in World War II, the two genres. But also Howard Stark, of course, we talked about him as a proto-Tony, but we only get to see him from the outside. He is not the main character of Captain America, so we only see, not exactly Stark Expo, smarmy Howard, but we see his very public, kind of jazzy inventor persona that he presents to the world.
We see a little bit in his friendship with Steve after he clears up the misconception, because Steve just assumes that Howard and Peggy are a thing. And fondue is so cute. Steve just doesn't know shit about and it's really funny. But Howard as just like, oh yeah, I could absolutely see this guy as Tony's dad, because he will put on the Stark Expo persona, and then his experimental tech will fizz out on stage, and he'll be like, I did say it was a prototype, ha ha ha, and it'll still work. It's like, great, okay, he's playing to the crowd. And then it's like, we need a private plane that will drop Steve into the heart of Hydra territory. Fortunately, I know this insane man who will gladly fly you there himself, even though it's a war zone, because there's something about him that just really makes it seem natural for him to fly into the world's most dangerous airspace in his own little private tech. Yeah, sure. Howard Stark is a private citizen using his wealth for good.
Yep.
Yeah, it makes sense. There's something profoundly tragic and slightly understated about the fact that Howard and Tony really are so similar, but in exactly the way where the gears would grind and they wouldn't be able to know it, which is, it's rough, buddy.
It is tragic.
Yeah.
Captain America, movie laced with tragedy.
Yep.
But I want to call out the specific line where they do an early test of the super serum reactor thingy.
It's the Tesseract.
Oh, the Tesseract, yeah.
He's fiddling with some of the confiscated Hydra weaponry powered by the Tesseract, and it sends out a massive energy beam that blasts him across the room, and he just goes, write that down. And then, Tony, when does he say not bad? Is that after the de-icing
He says
thing?
not bad when he crashes after flying out of the camp in
Yes,
Afghanistan.
right.
Yeah.
In the Mark 1 armor.
In the Mark
in
1.
In the crater in the sand surrounded by the shattered remains of his suit. Not bad.
Not bad.
Amazing. All the characterization we need from these two morons.
It's interesting to see you mention this, how we get the sense of the chip on Tony's shoulder of like, oh, your dad's best friend. This is the guy he was so obsessed with. Howard Stark is a really good haunting presence in this narrative where he doesn't overstay his welcome. He's not in every single movie, but he is in the background just kind of leering over the events, present and proximate to a lot of this without having his fingers in absolutely everything.
Yeah.
That, of course, is Nick Fury's job.
Yay!
Because every side character has their own agenda, and we get a lot of sense of wide characterization space beyond just the protagonists of these movies. So Tony is another one of Natasha's many missions that she is on for S.H.I.E.L.D. Fury says, you're not even my biggest problem in the Southwest. Coulson dips for New Mexico midway through the movie to go deal with Mjolnir. And in Thor, Hawkeye happens to simply be the S.H.I.E.L.D. agent on call to deal with whoever might be trying to steal Mjolnir. And Selvig is already mind-controlled by Loki in the post-credit scene going into Avengers. So a lot of characters have their own little agendas playing out in this side, which makes the world feel wider and real and with more people that matter than just the protagonist.
Yeah.
And of course, this is most strongly represented in Nick Fury, who is scheming all the time to create his Avengers initiative. Every movie of Phase 1 and Hulk by proxy by, sending Stark out there. He's got Wakanda on his map, which is kind of a fun thing. More of an Easter egg than a meaningful connection, because that doesn't get brought up until way the hell later.
Yeah.
But there are lots of simultaneous plates spinning across these films and woven threads through all of them that make it feel like this kind of crossover energy of anyone can show up in anyone else's movie, and anyone usually does show up in someone else's movie.
Yeah, Fury, I think, is a really important binding thread in these early movies. Part of what I think started frustrating me about later installments is they really kind of let Fury fall by the wayside. And I think part of the problem is Fury is too good at his job. He is too competent.
Yeah.
He is a heroic, dreaded figure. He is too good at what he does, which means he's really fucking hard to write.
Yep.
World's most paranoid, overprepared man. Nick Fury is the Batman equivalent of this world in that any situation he's in, he has planned for. That has to be the way Fury is characterized. That's really fucking hard to keep going for this many movies, but it works in the first 6, because it's like, okay, Fury is dealing with an unprecedented threat. Fortunately, that's what he's been prepping this superhero team for, just in case world's most paranoid man wins again.
Yeah. And even still, in the process of assembling his superhero team, he's like, oh, these Asgardians are business. Let's build weapons.
Yeah.
So he is always scheming, withholding information very purposefully. We get a little bit more of that in Captain America 2. Compartmentalization, he calls it. Very diplomatic way to describe willfully withholding information and lying to your team.
Well, but
hey, that's Fury.
That's Fury, because the thing is, Fury's like, I'm not on your team. I control your team. You are a tool that I deploy to solve problems. I don't tell you all of my shit. In our rewatch, as a treat, afterwards we watched Winter Soldier, because of course we did. And Fury's so good in that movie. I feel like it's the last movie he's really good in. And you get this very interesting thing where it's like Nick Fury doesn't trust anyone on Earth except Steve Rogers. Steve, his specialist boy, who he will grudgingly trust with his life and his information if absolutely necessary. Side note, it's kind of cool that he trusts Steve but not Natasha. And Natasha sort of has to meta-narratively earn her right to be trusted as a full hero over the course of the movie, even though we, the audience, are like, of course she's a good guy. She's in the Avengers. What are you talking about? But like, no, she's a super spy. She's like a triple, quadruple, triple axle secret agent. Like, of course, this is her whole gimmick. And Nick Fury, world's most paranoid man, is like, there's not a single person on Earth I can trust, except the literal paragon of goodness who I always trust to do what he thinks is right.
Yeah.
And that doesn't play up as much in Avengers because, again, Joss Whedon doesn't like Captain America as a character, which is fine. He gives him some moments in the fight. It's not as bad as I thought it would be. I was prepping for the worst, and it was okay. But, like, you don't get that. You just get the slightly cool moment of Fury being like, stay on target, just, focus on your task, and don't worry about the information I'm hiding. And then Steve is like, Tony, you gotta stop hacking into these things because I'm gonna go physically break in. It's faster. That's my fucking boy right there. They got him right for one scene.
Yeah. The agenda is S.H.I.E.L.D. S.H.I.E.L.D. is a very important presence throughout these movies, manifested in Nick Fury, but it is important to note also musically that the Avengers theme is partially the S.H.I.E.L.D. theme, and it is essential that is in there. One of the interesting things about the way that Phase 1 is laid out is that there's only one direct sequel in this bunch, Iron Man to Iron Man 2. And Hulk is very siloed off from the rest of them because Iron Man 1 was a Hail Mary, Hulk was a simultaneous Hail Mary, they both went in 2008, and Iron Man was a smash hit, and they're like, oh my god, this buys us up to Avengers.
Yep.
So they had a plan to obviously follow up Iron Man because it was very profitable. They're like, okay, we can just kind of like let Hulk sit in the corner there, and we'll loop him back in for Avengers, but he's just going to be kind of in the corner until then. With Iron Man 2, they do a very interesting play of how they drive towards the events of Avengers. Iron Man 2 has simultaneously the events of Thor going on in the background, overlapping it, and leads into Thor very well. Again, it's not just the post-credit scene. Everything about Iron Man 2's setup of what's going on with S.H.I.E.L.D. leads into Thor being the movie you watch afterwards. And then Thor sets up all of the MacGuffins with Norse stuff and the Tesseract and what the Nazis are all interested in to make Captain America the logical movie that follows after that. So even though Iron Man 2, Thor, and Cap are not direct sequels to each other, they flow linearly in that order specifically, driving towards Avengers, so that when Cap is done, there's nothing else you would ever need to put in. All of the pieces are assembled perfectly for you.
Yeah, they build up one to the other. With Iron Man 2, you get the Stark Expo, you get Tesseract-derived tech, although we don't really know that's what it is at the time. Thor establishes basically the greater universe, the wider world that we might start dealing with, the realms, etc., etc.
Yep.
And the fact that, stuff in Odin's treasure hoard is important. I get the impression that the nameless MacGuffin they're dealing with is the Casket of Ancient Winters because it is cold, so I'm just kind of assuming.
It looks like that's what it is.
It looks like that's probably what it is, if I had to guess. But then the idea that, like, a discarded, mislaid gem can become, like you said on that earlier slide, like a war-reshaping X-factor in this situation that nobody knows how to deal with. But, of course, the Nazis are f***ing obsessed with it because it's Norse mythology made manifest. It builds, and going into Cap with the context of Thor, again, completely changes how we read every single one of Red Skull's monologues, because it's like, actually, they would think you're a big stinky jerk. Yeah, they're not sequels, but they, like you said, they go in sequence, they build one on top of the other in a way that makes you connect the dots yourself.
Inspired by your graph with the hero hating each other matrix of Arcana, I wanted to make a quick little graph here to show how this works. Obviously, we have Iron Man 1 to Iron Man 2. Hulk leads into Avengers, but not into anything else. But then Iron Man 2 to Thor to Cap, right into Avengers. It's this very clean progression. So the effect that you get is there's just basically a straight shot from Iron Man to Avengers. And even though these are kind of lateral movies in a way, I have them on this diagonal here instead of just going down in a line, it's a very clean, elegantly composed ramping up of momentum towards Avengers. And I will ask of you all, I know I said I was going to be nice, I was going to focus on Phase 1. Let me be mean about it for one slide.
Because being so nice is exhausting.
Phase 4, a good bad example. Part of this was made, post-COVID. Black Widow launched in 2021. There was a lot of things that were difficult about this little span of time. I think writer strike and actor strike was Phase 5. But the only meaningful connection of a character showing up in another person's movie is WandaVision leading into Doctor Strange and What If leading into Doctor Strange and a little bit of Spider-Man, but that doesn't even count. That doesn't lead in narratively. It's just, Doctor Strange is in this one. And this is basically, Phase 4 is for the Wong gang and nobody else. Wong fans only in Phase 4. Everyone else is starving for content.
Yeah, you're very right. I will say, the lateralness, building out the world in directions we haven't seen before, is not a terrible approach. A lot of the fact that these things aren't interconnected does reduce the amount of homework you have to do. You can watch just, for instance, WandaVision, Hawkeye, and Moon Knight, which is like the only things of the shows that I watched, and be like, yeah, these aren't connected, but that kind of means that I can just enjoy them privately without getting worried that they're going to get ruined by something else, you know? Because surely they would never take the extremely profound and powerful ending of WandaVision and then absolutely fucking scuttle it for the purpose of a movie that was really bad. That would be insanity and indicate that nobody in the writer's room was talking to anybody else or planning anything on the large scale.
The movie went through about 20 or 28 rewrites, as I am informed by the internet.
The lateral approach is not automatically bad. Like we said, Incredible Hulk isn't super connected to those other movies, and we still thought it was completely fine. And the idea that that was just happening out in the world makes the world feel larger.
What I will say to the point about Hulk is that the gap between Hulk and Avengers is 4 years. The first team-up movie we are seeing in the multiverse saga is Thunderbolts, where all of these characters are at least 4 years since their last appearance. It's been a while, and in Ghost Case, 7 years since Ant-Man and the Wasp. It's been a goddamn time since these guys last showed up. Whereas the full calendar elapsation from Iron Man 1 to Avengers was 4 years. And there was a gap where it was 2008, Iron Man and Hulk, nothing 2009, and then 2010 was Iron Man 2, 2011 was Thor and Cap, 2012 was Avengers. Very quick turnaround.
Yep.
All of the Marvel stuff, and there's so much of gaps between these characters. If we go back, like, yes, some of these characters are going to appear in something this year or next, but it's a while, and having the audience wait around that long for anything to connect is a point of comparison that I don't want to dally on this too long, but it shows how unconnected anything is in the multiverse saga of Marvel.
Yeah, I think you can feel the consequences of the scattershot approach because, again, it is okay to tell disconnected stories within the same connected world. It's fine. It works really well in a lot of cases, but it sacrifices the ability to braid together these kinds of cohesive narratives with that level of forefront and planning, because with the scattershot approach, you can cut loose the dead weight. If something doesn't work, you can pretend it never happened. But they didn't even cut loose Incredible Hulk from Phase 1. Like, a lot of people don't watch it, and they don't lose much, but they didn't pretend like it never happened so much. They were just kind of like, okay, we recast him, whatever. We've done that before. We did that in Iron Man 1 to Iron Man 2. It's not that big of a deal.
I don't mean to get needlessly negative. I did ask to indulge me one more slide of being mean.
Just a little.
But they don't make it like this anymore. Everything in Phase 1 was load-bearing, intentional, and it mattered. Even though Iron Man 1 and Hulk were abundantly not made in the knowledge that they were going to have up to Avengers. They were basically shots in the dark. Let's do the best we can and see what happens. After those movies came out, it's like, okay, we've earned our way to Avengers. Let's do everything knowing that's our plan and that's our end goal. That was good. And it worked. It was deliberate. It let the movies connect and feel like they belonged together. They were all distinct, but they had anchor points and bridges across each other that made them feel like part of a set. But it was also only 6 movies. 5 and then the ice cream afterwards. It's not too much that it feels unwieldy. They knew what they had a plan, and they didn't get greedy. The Disney Plus strategy of just lavishing a bunch of money on stuff because, Avengers Endgame made $2 billion. Let's see if we can get any more of that, squeeze some blood out of the stone. That's Disney getting greedy. That's not what they were doing in the first phase. And even talking about phases 2 and 3, they still do things that made phase 1 great. They still have some bangers of movies in there, but things started to fray as the scope grew, and they stopped being able to pick their battles and have everything connect. They had things be out in their own little corners, like Guardians of the Galaxy doesn't tie into anything else for another 7 years. Guardians was good. But it was the furthest detached from anything else, and everything else started to feel that detached, but then not as good. And the whole project felt less authored and deliberate than it used to be when there was a very clear, simple 6-film plan where the people in charge could devote a lot of time to each movie because there weren't 17 things in production at once. So I think the Infinity Saga is still fun, but no phase is as cohesive, competent, or enjoyable as phase 1.
Yeah, and I think, not to get specific, but there was one thing that we noticed that they stopped doing, which is that in phase 1, anytime something is foreshadowed, it pays off.
In the phase.
In that phase, yeah. Every time they planted something, they paid it off. Like I said, as a dessert, we watched Winter Soldier. And when we got through the end of that movie, we were like, damn, they set up like 5 different things they could have used to pay off, and then they didn't. They just kind of stopped doing any of them. They were like, oh, Fury's going off to Europe to deal with the remaining Hydra cells. The next time we hear about this, they are dealing with the last one at the beginning of Ultron. So we didn't do that. We've talked about, like, they'd set up a sequel and then not do the sequel. They do the sequel after the sequel. Like with Doctor Strange, it's like, we're setting up Mordo, we're setting up no more magicians, and then we don't do that. We say it happened off screen and then we do something else instead.
So mad.
Yes.
Give me Mordo's wizard genocide.
Yeah, like give me something. But like the fact that once they started planting things that then they never paid off made the world feel less cohesive. It made it feel certainly much less planned. This came from the willingness to start sacrifice perfectly good stories because they didn't perform good or something like that. When you start working on a franchise like this and it starts going off the rails, you have to at some point decide if you're going to commit to the bit or start tearing it down to start over. And I am always on the side of commit to the bit, even if it's stupid and hurts, because there's a lot of bits that I wish they didn't have to commit to. I've seen the alternative. I've seen the infinite crises, as it were, you know, the constant reboots, remakes, we're going to do it right this time. And it's like, no, after a certain point, you just have to commit. There's things that don't work in, I'd say, every Phase 1 movie. There's something where it's like, that was a little bit weak. Except maybe Iron Man, of course, the perfect movie. They weren't like, well, okay, we messed that up. We're going to do it again, but good this time. You don't make any forward progress if you just spin the wheels of the remake cycle. And you also don't really make any forward progress if you're constantly cutting off your own tail of like, well, I know that was important, but now it doesn't matter, actually. We're doing something else. I know that was important. Doesn't matter. There are a lot of reasons why that happened. I don't think it was like malice aforethought. I don't think it was like laziness. I think that what happened was that it got so big and so unwieldy that it stopped being able to support its own weight. And a lot of what helped Phase 1 was its brevity and the fact that they planned it from not from minute 1, but like minute 3-ish, you know?
From minute 3. After Iron Man and then Hulk came out, they're like, okay, as we are planning Iron Man 2, let's draw this out.
Let's build on what we've already established and go from there without introducing any completely new things that haven't been in some way foreshadowed. It worked really well, and it held up incredibly well on a rewatch, and it made me mad that they couldn't keep it up, but like at the same time, it's like, man, I understand, you know, this was kind of lightning in a bottle. Like, I could see how they got so worried in the scramble to try and recreate the magic of the first time that they started casting off the bits they thought weren't working.
Yeah, I don't know how much I want to call it lightning in a bottle, because this really is all skill.
That's true.
The fact that it became so successful is an element of luck, but like, it wasn't just like, oh, this was lightning in a bottle, people liked it for whatever reason. They put their whole ass into this, and it showed. It was the product of work and talent culminating in good-ass art. You can still make good art in the capitalist machinery that turns ever onward of the modern Disney, you know, shareholder value chase and throw a bunch of stuff on Disney Plus or whatever the hell their strategy is now. But it is incidental to the turning of the MCU wheel that any of the individual projects will be good nowadays. Whereas there were people who knew what they were doing, who had a vision. Kenneth Branagh making a Shakespeare movie in Thor. People who knew exactly what they wanted to do and had the resources to do it.
Yeah.
That, I think, is part of what the difference is. And all of that leads into the sense that, oh, there was an idea. They could become something more.
Yeah.
This worked. I'm not the first person to say, oh, you know, MCU is super lame now. It's a pretty dull thesis, and that's not really what I'm trying to get at. But in watching these movies in one go, I could appreciate the subtle ways and the overt ways that the 6-movie slate felt laterally and linearly cohesive in a way that the later films never did. And it's just so well done because you can see how much care was put into it at every stage. Characterization, setting, structure, and interconnectivity. All of this setting up and paying off within the same phase in places, even before we get to Avengers. Chef's recommendation is watch them all in sequence over a long weekend, if you have that opportunity.
Highly recommend.
It's just so good. It wasn't an accident. They tried hard and it worked because they cared and they had the resources to do it, and the business interests weren't pulling them in 6 separate directions to try to get as much stuff on the platform or in theaters as possible.
You're right. I didn't want to imply that, like, oh, we don't know how this happened. It was just magic and they'll never replicate it. I think that, you know, calling it lightning in a bottle is like, they really pulled this off. They put a ton of work into it. They were seemingly single-mindedly dedicated to making the best story they could, which I think you can tell. You can tell when the artists are single-mindedly dedicated to just telling the best story they can. I think that a lot of what has made later things fall flatter has not been like, oh, they've lost that je ne sais quoi, that sauce that was making it work. I think that it is, after a certain point, too many cooks in the kitchen, too much willingness to throw out established setup in favor of just bringing in some new thing with no planting or payoff.
Yeah.
And I think that it's very reassuring to go back to phase 1 and like it more than the first time through. Because, like, I remember when Iron Man 2 came out, everyone was like, oh, it's lame, it's weird. Nothing cool happens, and then you go through and you're like, oh, this is a profoundly tragic character arc of Tony slowly spiraling into self-destruction, and he's so isolated that he can't see that there will be more consequences for the people he loves from his death than just making him not able to do his job anymore. And I feel like they could do this again, and there have been highlights within later phases. People bring up the Guardians trilogy as
Guardians trilogy is great.
Guardians 1 leads into Guardians 2, leads into Guardians 3, and Guardians 3 does commit to the consequences. They're like, yeah, you killed our female lead and all of her character development. I'm not going to correct for your writing. We're all going to sit with the consequences of that. And I hugely respect that decision. That romantic subplot's not coming back. It's dead because you killed her.
I also want to shout out Shang-Chi is really great. You really liked WandaVision. I loved Hawkeye. You've seen Moon Knight liked it a lot. There's a lot of stuff in the later movies that we still like.
That's the thing.
It's just the ratio of good stuff to total MCU volume has fallen the f*** off.
That's exactly it. Marvel has replicated the problem of published comics. It's a scattershot approach, and you never know if it's going to be good or if it's going to stay good, and you never know if the status quo is going to completely change because they rug pulled a new writing team and now something new is happening. And the fact that the movies have replicated this, I almost wonder if it's something innate to the story format itself, or if it's just the too many cooks in the kitchen effect. The scattershot approach can pay dividends. I thought Hawkeye was a tremendous amount of fun, with the caveat that I didn't like what they did with Wilson Fisk. I thought that they severely defanged him in a way that made him much less intimidating, while still leveraging the dread that he inspired from his appearance in Daredevil, which felt a little bit like trying to have your cake and eat it too. And then I really liked Moon Knight. I didn't mind that it ended with a big CGI giant monster fight. It's a Marvel show. I didn't mind that WandaVision ended with a big CGI witch fight. It's a Marvel show. I thought that the emotional stakes of both shows were incredibly good. Good stuff can come out of this story format, but it becomes a churn. You're spinning a wheel to see if you're going to get something good this season. Even if something is good, that doesn't mean it'll ever come back again. That's part of the frustration. Instead of being a single cohesive narrative being told from many different angles, it's become a lot of different narratives, some of them cohesive, but none of them interconnected to the same level of fidelity that we got back in phase 1. And I think it's simply because you cannot simultaneously do the scattershot approach and be willing to throw stories by the wayside if they don't perform the way you want them to, and braid all the stories together into a single overarching narrative that comes together into one culmination. If I had to pick a punching bag, I'd say that Ultron is where this started falling apart, and I think it is because instead of paying off things that they had set up before, they were like, we need to do Ultron now, so they have already beaten Hydra. All of it. They didn't need to do that. They were like, we're done. We need to make a new problem now. Hooray! We're trying to be positive. We're trying to be positive. Phase 1 was really, really good.
Phase 1 was really good. Why was it so good? If I had to sum it up, it's an old-fashioned idea. Phase 1 really was that good, which we already kind of said that much, but gets to the heart of it. Phase 1 can be good without everything else being terrible. We don't need to do revisionist history, but we can appreciate the genuine artistry in what made this so enjoyable, and take solace in the fact that it's still good. We can go back, and it's still good on its own. We can end with Avengers and be like, wow, what a wonderful 6-movie marathon that we can revisit whenever we want, because it's still there and we can still enjoy it.
And then watch Winter Soldier as a dessert.
And Winter Soldier for a little post-dinner ice cream scoop.
Yeah, to make up for what they did to Captain America. Honestly, I think it's very reassuring to go back and be like, okay, they were that good. I'm not crazy. Because, like, enshitting is a gradual process, and oftentimes it can make you feel a little bit gaslit by reality to be like, was I just stupid for liking this before? Has it always felt like this? And it's like, no, it used to feel better because it used to be better put together. And it's those parts of it are still good. They still exist. Also, just like to add a little like tangible meaning to the talking, I think it is extremely important to unpack how things like this can start falling apart, what decision-making processes behind the camera can start leading to things like this that are off to such a promising start falling apart. Because if you ever want to tell any sort of large interconnected story, it's very important to learn from history wherever you can. We're seeing like DC is trying to take their turn with making an interconnected universe, and I'm excited. I'm tentatively excited to see what they do with Superman. Cautiously optimistic. I will be keeping an eye out, and I'll be keeping an open mind, because I think that this is a formula that can work. And I don't think it is inevitable that superhero franchises will always collapse under their own weight. I think there are ways to do this. And Phase 1 proves that there was a way to do this. It's just, how far and how long can that be maintained? And how plausible is it to do it as a series of live-action movies with, like, actors who visibly age over time and, like, you know, contracts and stuff like that? There are factors, I think, to why things are going wonky in recent phases. But I think going back to the beginning and seeing, okay, what did they do here that worked? And what does that let us see more clearly about what they're doing here that isn't working?
Yeah.
Before we watched through Phase 1, we didn't realize how interconnected it was and how elegantly it brought everything together. But now it's like, oh yeah, that is definitely a sauce that is missing. We don't have the same level of interconnectedness of the way that these heroes all build up into each other to the point where their meeting feels like almost a destined thing. The scene where Thor and Iron Man and Steve are all in the forest, you know, standing in that one big group shot, a bare half second away from doing the Spider-Man pointing meme. It's like, yeah, this was what this was always meant to be. Yeah, it was super fun, a very rewarding experience.
Go watch them for yourself. Go back and watch through these movies, all 6 of them in order. I think you'll really enjoy them for the reasons that we have outlined here. But until then, as we send you off to your movie marathon, that's all from us today at OSP. So,
bye!